Hi there, everyone. On January 17, 1893, under the threat of the United States military and to avoid a collision with the U.S. Armed Forces and the potential loss of life, the Kingdom of Hawaii's monarch, Queen Lili'uokalani, is overthrown forcibly, removed from power, and imprisoned. Today, I want to talk about that, how Lili'uokalani ascends to the throne as Queen of Hawaii. I want to talk about how Hawaii businessmen, together with the American ambassador or the American minister to Hawaii, together used military force to illegally remove the queen and imprison her. And then I want to talk about how under protest of the Hawaiian people, the Hawaiian Islands was officially annexed by the United States. But first, some things to know. First things is, how did this all start? Now, Johnny Harris and his video, How the U.S. Stole Hawaii, and also another video by Apologia Studios called Stealing Paradise. They talk about the missionaries and they say this is where it all starts because it's the descendants of the missionaries that become the businessmen. See, the missionaries come and all they want to talk about Jesus, but when two generations later, they don't want to talk about Jesus. They only think about business, think about money. They're thinking about politics and power. And they start, Apologia goes further and they say how the descendants of the missionaries had their eyes on the government. They thought they could do better and they wanted the control and they had the desire to remove the monarchy from the picture. The second thing to know is that when Lili'uokalani becomes queen, Hawaii is already considered to be an independent country. Hawaiian Kingdom Academia talks about this in their video, Speaking Truth to Power, and they talk about how Kamehameha III, seeing how the islands of the Pacific was being colonized, he doesn't want this to happen, so he takes a trip and he makes treaties with England, France, even the United States, and by doing that, in 1843, Hawaii becomes the first country to be recognized by the world community. And once that happens, they cannot be colonized by anyone to include the United States. By the time Lili'uokalani becomes queen, there's already 100 embassies, Hawaii embassies and legations throughout the world, peace treaties, all kind of stuff put in place where the other countries recognize Hawaii to be its own independent nation. The third thing is that the American businessmen in Hawaii were already trying to control the monarchy and even take it over. Lili'uokalani writes in her book, Lili'uokalani, the Last Queen, of a time where her brother Kalakaua was called back from a trip because there was a threat of an overthrow of the monarchy. Now, Helena Allen, in her book Betrayal of Lili'uokalani, writes about the same time, but she talks about how when the king arrives home, he is taken at gunpoint, taken to a meeting, and with a gun pointed to him, he is forced to sign a new constitution called the Bennett Constitution, where it basically stripped the monarch from all his powers, making him a puppet king. The Bennett Constitution then gave full control of all the laws to the missionary party, which was comprised of all the wealthy businessmen. Queen Lili'uokalani ascends to the throne, Queen of Hawaii. January 29, 1891, the king dies, and Lili'uokalani was sworn in as queen, as sovereign of this independent nation, Kingdom of Hawaii. As she tries to gather her thoughts about her brother's death, the ministers force her to take the oath of her office as queen by swearing allegiance to the Bennett Constitution, the same constitution that says she has no power. But on January 14, 1893, Queen Lili'uokalani tries to take the power back with a new constitution that would replace the Bennett Constitution, restoring power back to the monarchy. And when she tries to introduce it to her cabinet, they all betray her and refuse to sign it. At the same time, the USS Boston, a very powerful military ship, was pulling into Honolulu Harbor, and the Annexation Club and plantation owners was making their move against the Queen. Now I'm going to talk about the Committee of Safety and the Provisional Government that moved against Lili'uokalani. Now, attorney L.A. Thurston summoned his business colleagues and they identified 13 businessmen. They create this committee of safety to look after and protect their own safety and interests. Thurston also makes a motion to declare provisional government. The minister to Hawaii, John Stevens, he signals to the USS Boston and requests his help to protect committee members. And they send 162 fully armed and equipped soldiers to shore to protect the committee against this one queen, the monarch. They start the proclamation to depose the queen and abrogate her from the throne, and the fully established the provisional government as the de facto government of Hawaii. January 17, 1893, in fear of the brutal fighting and loss of life of all people, Queen Lili'uokalani, under protest and duress and threat from the armed United States military, surrenders her power and yields her authority. That came from a video by 20 Attaboy and the students of an intermediate school who created this video, Subjugation of a Nation and the Overthrow of the Hawaiian Monarchy. But there's a new president in the United States, and he realizes that what's happening is illegal. It's not. It shouldn't be happening. And so he goes to Congress and he tells Congress that we can't do this. We cannot annex Hawaii. Hawaii is an independent nation. We even have treaties with them. And to annex Hawaii would be an act of war. And to remove the queen from power would be a violation of international law. On January 1895, there is then a revolt in Hawaii, an attempt to restore the queen back to the throne by force that fails. And during this resistance, 2 people are shot and 1 person dies. Because of this revolt and the queen's attempts to be reinstated through the president, Queen Lili'uokalani is arrested for these offenses, made up offenses. Lili'uokalani writes in her book and how she remembers being escorted under military guard to Ilani Palace, and she was kept under military guard until February 6, 1896. In order to save the lives of her friends and servants that was arrested with her, still under duress, on January 19, 1895, she abdicates from the throne and her authority as queen for the promise that all her spoils would be released. Now with the monarch out of the way, they can move forward with the annexation. As we talk about the annexation, remember that at this point, Hawaii is already definitely a known independent country with many treaties with many other countries. And Congress, though, is working to annex Hawaii through a treaty, the only way that is legal. But they need 2/3 vote, and they cannot get it. So they end up trying through a joint resolution of Congress because it only takes 50% of the votes. The problem is that through the Constitution, they cannot go through a joint resolution. They have to go through a treaty. That is the only way they can overturn a government and annex a country. But on July 12, 1898, the joint resolution passes and the Hawaii Islands was officially annexed by the United States. But what hurt most was not the stealing of the land. It was the stealing of the culture. The Hawaiian people was still resisting. Samuel Mills Damon, Vice President of the Provisional Government, he says, if we are ever to have peace and annexation, the first thing to do is to obliterate the past. So to get 44,000 Hawaiians to conform to an annexation, the United States begins through Americanization and denationalization to take over the culture. And how do they do this? They do this through their language. They take their language from them. They declare that only English could be spoken and taught in schools. And so eventually the language was lost. And because the history and culture of the old ways was documented in the Hawaiian language, that was eventually lost as well. And so as I conclude, I'm not here to blast the past or speak ill of our United States. I'm just here to inform you of the past and let you know of a tremendous wrong that happened to the Hawaiian people and how the Hawaiian people and the monarchy of the Hawaiian government was treated and illegally overthrown and imprisoned back in those days. Dr. Keanu signed his book, he also speaks of all of this, the illegal overthrow and the illegal occupation that started then, and he says continues even till this day. He also mentions of second president, President William Clinton, how on November 23rd, 1993, he also signed a resolution of apology to the Hawaiian people for this illegal overthrow of 1893. And so, my friends, anyone could see that the overthrow and imprisonment of Queen Lili'uokalani and the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii was not only done illegally, but it was done in a violent, a brutal way meant to humiliate the Queen. It was basically about a huge, stronger country with a powerful military overthrowing a smaller, weaker country. According to the US Constitution, 2 presidents, quite a few history books, the annexation was illegal and done as an act of war and should still be invalid. And the overthrow of the imprisonment of the Queen and of Lili'uokalani, a violation of international law. Thank you, folks, for watching. Aloha.